Hello and welcome to the Scaleforum 2025 report. This is the last of a four-part series of videos covering the show. This part of the report covers the upper section of the sports hall and the demonstrations area. In the middle of the hall we have the Judith Edge stand, offering their finely detailed 4mm kits. And on top of the cabinet, an example of a test build for a new model, a 150 horsepower Fowler 040 diesel shunter. Over by the hall wall, we have the Rolvenden layout.
Now we come to something rather special. Rolvenden by Robin Gay. The layout depicts a well-known subject, a Colonel Stevens line, set in the 1920s at the height of its operation before road competition took over in rural areas. This is another of those layouts where you need to spend time looking at the detail in an uncrowded environment so you have time to stop and stare. So starting at the far end, we have the windmill. This is based on the preserved mill at Rolvenden. Moving along the line, there is the Rolvenden P-Way gang, changing out a sleeper, equipped with a trolley, lifting jacks, picks and shovels, and lots of muscle power. Sheep were a common sight on farms in the 1920s, here being gathered up by the farmer and a couple of collie dogs. To the right of the shed in the middle are long chestnut poles, waiting to be used to build or repair a hop garden. In the river there is the ever-hopeful fisherman. Hopefully he's careful on his back cast not to catch a passing train. On the other side of the railway, the river detail shows fine observation. The bank overhangs and there is a little bit of slip, with reeds growing, next to the swans. Over the fence is a fine veg plot, with runner beans, potatoes, collies, cabbages and lettuce. There are also 3 beehives for honey. Moving along the line we come to the level crossing. Just beyond that, notice the slight hump in this end of the platform, with milk churns standing on it. This was done to aid the lifting of heavy churns up into the vans when loading. Often a ramp would be used to slide the churns up. 17 gallons weighs an awful lot. Now let's watch a few trains running. Here we have the loco Rother departing for Tenterden.
I get it out each time I come out.
And from line side, The platform and station buildings are decorated with lots of advertising, and there is a good show of flowers in front of the office. In the loco yard, we have a collection of tank locos of various vintages, and also number 7, Rother, an ex-London and South Western Ilfracombe goods, number 0349. One curiosity on the Cantonese Sussex was this pair of vehicles, a petrol-driven Ford railcar set, bought around 1923, from Edmonds of Thetford, with coachwork from Eaton Coachworks of Cringleford. Another curiosity is this unusual vehicle, number 6, a steam-driven railcar. It was little used and eventually scrapped in 1941. In the yard there is a ganger busy preparing materials, cutting some rail using a handsaw attached to the rail. Look closely at the edge of the ballast and you will see the signal wire and pulleys modelled. Just by the entrance to the loco yard is this haystack, neatly finished like a thatched roof to keep the rain out. And from here we can see a typical mixed train arriving, with Rother at its head.
I'll hold the button in, but don't fly through the gates with it. No.
Moving along a little further, there is a hop garden, with tall poles and wires holding up the bines. To access the top, the farm labourer used tall ladders or walked on stilts. The coconut matting is being put up to act as a windbreak, to stop damage when the bines are loaded with full leaf and hops. Once ready to pick, a small army of labourers came into the area to pick the hops into wicker bushel baskets by hand. This required the running of extra trains, that were colloquially known as hop picker specials. Every hop farm had to have an oast house, the tall conical building, for drying the hops so that they would keep until required by the brewer to make beer. The cowling at the top could be rotated, to use the wind to draw the heat up through the hops when drying. And finally, one tiny detail very easy to miss is this woodpecker, busy searching for grubs in a dead tree. So, next time you see this layout at an exhibition, take the time to stop and stare. Your patience will be rewarded.
On the opposite side of the hall was London Road Models, showing a wide range of kits, mainly London and North Western in origin, but also incorporating products absorbed into the range covering other railways. Here we have some new wagon kits for London and North Western, developed in collaboration with Mearn Valley Models, using a combination of 3D printed bodies with etched brass and nickel silver for the running gear. Next in line was the Pendon stand, advertising the museum and encouraging visitors to go to it, showing an eye-catching video of a driver's eye view of the Vale scene, and examples of how they build their models. Pre-grouping railways had on show their huge range of wagon and coach kits, covering many different types, as long as they're built before 1923. One slightly different model that caught the eye was this northeastern coal wagon, with opening flaps for discharge, and internal slopes to direct the coal down through the trapdoor. Our last layout to look at is Ruyton Road.
With Ruyton Road, we have another example of a layout based on part of the Colonel Stevens Empire. This time it's the Shropshire and Montgomeryshire Railway, with a fictitious branch from Kinnerley Junction. The layout was built by John Spencer and exhibited in the 1990s, originally in EM gauge, but has since been converted to 18.83. and now shown by Paul Bannerman. The layout represents the end of a line at a small terminus, covering the platforms, goods sidings and quarry line. The run-round loop is off-stage in the fiddle yard. Again, this is one of those layouts where examination of the detail is well worth the time. The goods siding peters out in the grass, where there is probably a buffer stops buried in the gorse bushes. The patches of undergrowth carefully represented, not too much, with a sprinkling of colour for early summer. The platform shelter is a rather down-at-heel affair. The tin is lifting, and a bird has chosen the chimney as a good place to nest. Moving along the layout, we have the short platform with a couple of people waiting for a train. A small pen is provided on the goods siding for cattle and sheep on the way to market from this rural community. And on the far side of the line is the ground frame with its corrugated iron awning. Again, detailed modelling here picks up on the point-rodding stools and cranks. At the left side of the layout, the access to the fiddle yard is covered by a bridge over both the branch line and the quarry sidings. Walking over the bridge is a gentleman, probably the owner of the rather fine sports car behind, taking his dog for a walk. Naturally, the dog is posed, relieving itself on the flowers. Rolling stock is an eclectic mix, typical Colonel Stevens, with these hand-me-down coaches from the Great North of Scotland Railway for passengers and aged goods wagons of various origins. Here we have a sentinel shunting wagons full of limestone from a variety of railways, including North Staffs, Shropshire and Montgomeryshire, and Great Western. A quick flurry of activity, then peace descends, and the station goes back to sleep.
Now we come to the demonstration area in the sports hall. The opportunity was taken to talk to each of the demonstrators in turn and find out a little more about what they were showing.
First up was James Walters, showing some of his recent efforts with 3D printing of track. Visitors were able to discuss the process of layout development, from using enlarged OS maps, through the use of the Templot design software, to printing of finished track bases. All samples were printed using an FDM printer, and for comparison, some with 0.2mm nozzle, others with 0.4. The printed track bases come complete with functional chairs and check rails. Another project James was demonstrating was this turntable with controller. Again, the components are 3D printed. This aspect of the hobby has certainly captured the imagination, and the stand was always busy. Jeff Kent was demonstrating how he uses plasticard for modelling pretty much everything except operational parts. There is the inevitable question about whether it goes brittle with age or warps. He had to hand a couple of carriage sides, quite old, still straight and perfectly serviceable, to demonstrate that this was not the case. He makes carriage sides out of 15 thou plasticard, with a reinforcement strip to form the tumble home. One of the examples on show included this mill building, mostly in plasticard, but using aluminium foil to model the pan tiles on the roof. The mortar joints in the brickwork were formed using a scraper board knife. Here we have some more detailed models of station equipment, again primarily in plasticard, but with metal used for the sack truck forks. This line of motor vehicles aren't die-cast models, they're all made by Jeff. To form complex roof and cab shapes, layers of plasticard are glued together and then carefully filed to the required shape. One particular example that caught the eye was this signboard. The raised letters were individually cut out from a strip of plasticard, all with a simple razor blade. On the tools demonstration stand, David had a wide-ranging collection to show, although there was a theme of how to hold things. Here we have a set of needle holder pliers, which are sprung, shown in the open position, and now closed to grip a tiny component or wire. These little spring clips are good for holding things together for soldering. For slightly larger components, David showed a handheld jeweler's vise. For holding even bigger items, a micro tool vise was suggested. Quite heavy, so it will stay put on the bench for light work, but robust enough to be mounted in a vise if need be. And this device is a micro cutting block or chenille clamp for holding bar or tube when cutting at right angles or beveled. The faces are hardened, so will tolerate abrasions from saws or files. This is a circular clamp or vise. The pins can be rearranged to hold awkward shaped items. Moving on to other items on display. This was an interesting little device which David had made for centering a drill above a round bar. Position the upper round end in the drill chuck, then lower gently onto the workpiece. The V-yoke then turns to show if the bar is in the middle of the V. Gently adjust the position until the line on the V-yoke is centered. However, one of the visitors pointed out that a simpler solution is to put a drill in the chuck and then lower it gently onto the workpiece with a thin strip of metal between the drill point and the bar. If the strip of metal is level, then the drill point is centered on the top of the bar. If not, then adjust the bar's position. A great opportunity to share tips and tricks and to exchange ideas. Finally, David had this list of suppliers. To quote, "He could not accept any responsibility for how much you spend." Andy Vincent was showing his approach to CAD and 3D printing, based on his experience of producing vehicle bodies for London Road models, Brassmasters, and his own range Meon Valley models. He uses Autodesk Fusion CAD software to create the 3D models. In his work he makes extensive use of assemblies, and has developed a library of reusable components for his design. Visitors had the opportunity to discuss the various technologies used for printing, resin or filament, and their relative merits. On hand were some example models showing how to create wagons using a resin printer. These were printed bottom up, requiring a line of supports along the sole bar, as per the example on the right. These are removed after printing to give the finished model on the left. This example was produced using a resin printer, with all the mortar lines clearly picked out and the correct bonding. Note the castellated edges to key in the joint to the next arch. It is not uncommon that the parts come out slightly distorted or are subject to creep. This can be easily rectified by warming the part in hot water and then placing on a flat surface. For components such as building frames and structural cores, then filament printing may be a cheaper option. Whilst the finish is not as fine as the resin printing, it does tend to produce stronger, less brittle components. Simon Bolton was demonstrating chassis construction. He had two types of jigs to show. The first was a metal one, where the axles are held from underneath, and the horn blocks and bearings then placed on the chassis and soldered in place. and the second type from poppies, where one axle is held perpendicular to the jig. The axles are then held in position using the coupling rods. The bearings and horn blocks are threaded on the axles and then soldered into the loco frame. The various components required were on show, and here are some of the bearings with holders. The etch with 3 small holes is used to adjust the ride height for CSB suspension. The CSB wire is then threaded through the bearing holder and fixings in the chassis, which are often handrail knobs. A copy of an article in S4 News 194 was to hand, to explain the maths behind the positioning of supports, as well as a copy of Simon's book on building tank locomotives. And finally, a quick look at the fruits of some of his labours. Tamara Easter was demonstrating rolling stock conversions. In some cases swapping out entire wheel sets, in others changing the wheels themselves but retaining the axles and bearings. For driven wheels the pickups are arranged to touch on the wheel rims. However, for other rolling stock where free running is required, then the wheel sets are insulated one side, non-insulated the other, to allow for current pickup via the axle. For axle current collection, Tamara showed some pickup springs from DCC Concepts. These are metal coils which wrap around the axle to make electrical contact. The beauty of this arrangement is that it barely impacts on the free running of the vehicle. This little engine was simply converted by replacing the axles for longer ones and reprofiling the RTR wheels using the wheel form tool available from the Society. Tamara also had on display a number of locos successfully converted to P4. Our next demo was for couplings by Carl Crowther. He was showing examples of the various coupling types available and discussing their relative merits when it comes to layout operation. This example shows DG couplings with lifting loops. And here from Dingham there are loops that flip up. Another variation is the Burford coupling with a more substantial lifting loop. Alternatively, you could use the Spratt and Winkle coupling, in which case it is the hook that is pulled down from a fixed loop. Naturally, there was an example on show of an Alan Jackson type coupling, with a diagonal hook made from springy piano wire that is fixed at the opposite end of the vehicle. Or this example, made from a shorter, more flexible spring wire. Both operate by passing over magnets in the track. And then a variation on a theme, combining hooks that interlock with one another mounted on a diagonal pivot. This was a great opportunity to discuss the relative merits of these systems and which one would best suit your layout operation. That completes the demonstrators. Across the end of the hall was the bring and buy stall. At 9:30 on Saturday, it was heaped with lots of irresistible goodies. Hard to find kits, as well as RTR models. Often coming from Scalefour members, the kits come complete with P4 wheels and motors. Some bargains to be had. By 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, things were looking a little thin on the ground. Finally, at the end of the show, we had the awards. Here we see Chris Mitten being awarded the Society's Order of Merit by Jeremy Good for his work both as treasurer and on the new membership system and website development. This year the York Trophy for Best Layout, as voted for by show visitors, was quite rightly awarded to Mostyn, with Richard Oldfield collecting the trophy on behalf of the Barrymore team. Thank you for watching this series of reports
for the 2025 Scaleforum.